Hey everybody, it's so good to be here. It's been a while since I've done a speaking event, so I'm going to try to keep on the time frame. I want to start off, I'm not going to talk about myself too much. I do want to let you guys know I am a mom, just like William shared with you guys. I have a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. So I have young kids, very busy mom. I've been in parental rights advocacy for about 5, almost 6 years now. And the truth is that I stumbled across it accidentally. So I'm going to share a little bit tonight with you guys, or this afternoon, sorry, I don't think it's night yet, about what I've learned and how it's important for you to understand what's happening in parental rights, not just at the local level, the state level, but also at the federal level. So the first thing I want to ask you guys, how many of you have kids 18 and under? Anybody here tonight? No? So listen, you take this information to your kids, your grandkids. This is going to be important for them to know. The first thing I want to touch on is the Constitution, the United States Constitution. Obviously, we have our inalienable rights that are discussed in the Constitution, written out in the Constitution. But one of the things that is not written out in the Constitution is parental rights. I want to thank Courtney Turner, actually, earlier that was kind of speaking on this. She kind of laid some of the groundwork on the history behind this, and so did some of our other speakers. But I don't think our founding fathers, 250 years ago, thought that they were going to have to write out parental rights, right, as a constitutionally protected ideal. I mean, that almost seems bizarre. What we're looking at is realistically the last 50 or 60 years of this taking over of parental rights. Unfortunately, currently, right now in the United States, there's only 2 Supreme Court rulings that speak on parental rights. These are unprecedented waters that we're in. And the truth is that even if there was a precedence, there's no precedence for what we're dealing with right now. I'm going to get into state legislation. I'm going to get into what current state law is. I'm going to get into federal funding, what that looks like. And so you guys can be aware of what's happening in your state, and hopefully we'll be happy to take action to change that. So the first thing I want to share with you guys, in case you don't know, federal funding, let me just say this, parental rights, Moms for Liberty, we look to defend parental rights at all levels of government. So that doesn't just include public education. We're talking about local level, state, federal. Any way we can defend parental rights, that's what we look to do. When it comes to public education, which is if you've got a child under the age of 18, typically they're in public school or some type of school setting, right? Legally they're supposed to be. But what I want to talk to you is federal funding. Federal funding in public schools specifically. Private schools also can accept federal funding. Sorry about that. Private schools can also accept federal funding. So what does that look like? Our state constitution here in the state of Louisiana says that local autonomy is guaranteed. So your local school districts are guaranteed their local autonomy. But the moment that they put in an application, a grant, they file for a grant, federal grant dollars, and they accept that money, they remove, their local autonomy is removed. That same concept works at a state level. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the state of Louisiana depends for the government, our state government to function depends on over 60% of federal dollars. Did y'all know that? So what does that mean? That means we can have the best legislators at that Capitol, but as long as we're taking those federal dollars, we have to comply with the federal guidelines. We're not a self-sustaining government. So let's talk a little bit about COVID. When COVID took place, our state legislature passed laws for COVID mitigation. One of those things that was required by the state legislature was for school systems to write policy. Our school systems had to deal with COVID mitigation. So we're looking, March 2020 is when all this started, right? So let's fast forward to March 2021. The federal government came in and said, we have ESSER II. We're going to give billions of dollars to school systems to mitigate mental health over COVID mitigation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that looks like. First, I want you guys to understand there's not a public school system in the state of Louisiana that did not accept that ESSER II funding. Every school system did. It was funneled through our state education department, and then it was funneled down to our local districts. One of the requirements for that funding is that these local school systems had to purchase what's called a Tier 1 curriculum. What that means is that Tier 1 curriculum automatically puts all those children in a mental health intervention. Automatically. So you said, okay, well, what does that look like? What does a mental health intervention look like based on the federal dollars, the money we took, and how does it present itself in our public school system? Is anybody familiar with SEL? SEL is social emotional learning. SEL is part of the mental health intervention plan. The SEL is in the curriculum. All curriculum. Your math, your English. Matter of fact, it takes precedence, 9 out of 10 times, over the actual academic lesson. Mental health intervention in the curriculum. The other part of what has happened for the mental health intervention is that our school systems now have hired so many, the numbers are outrageous, of counselors, social workers, and behavioral specialists. So what does that look like? My encouragement to you is to reach out to your local public school system, the district, and request that information. Find out how many counselors your district has hired, how many social workers your district has hired, how many behavioral specialists your district has hired. I want to talk a little bit with this mental health intervention, what this looks like for these professions. So we have teachers, social workers, counselors, and behavioral specialists. You can request at your local school level, I can't promise you they'll give it to you, it's a fight to try to get it, their professional development. Once you have seen the professional development, you will be blown away. Blown away. The LGBTQ, one of my speakers were talking earlier about the great legislation that we passed here in the state of Louisiana around education. 100%, there was so much, there was some great work. I was a part of a lot of that work that happened last session. It was amazing. But guess what's not in the language of that legislation that passed? Counselors, social workers, and behavioral specialists. So even though now teachers can't can't assign pronouns or accept a pronoun from a child without parental consent, they can't talk about sexual orientation, things of the sort, that legislation does not affect our counselors, our social workers, and our behavioral therapists. So here's the full circle. So you say, okay, the federal government granted the district money. The district was able to hire all these extra professionals. The district was able to purchase a new curriculum for mental health intervention. But what is the catch for the district? Other than obviously they have this additional money, but they only have to spend it in specific places. You guys are all familiar with Medicaid here in the state of Louisiana, correct? Every school district in the state can file a Medicaid claim. And guess how they file it? Based on the services those professionals provide for that district. But it's not assigned to Johnny Smith. It's not like Johnny Smith saw ex-counselor and we're going to file a claim with Medicaid. I have 150 professionals to address mental health in my district. And based on those professions, I can file a percentage of the total student population to get a Medicaid check or rather a reimbursement for those services. That's quite the incentive. I'm not telling you that your local school districts are bad. What I'm telling you is they're being incentivized to implement these programs. So back to the beginning, I said what? As long as we have federal dollars coming into our state, we will not have the autonomy that's granted to us by our Constitution. The next thing that I want to share with you guys is a state law. Last year, I led the team that works Representative Gabe Furman's bill on banning gender-affirming care in the state of Louisiana. That was an incredible piece of legislation. We were very proud to get that passed. That was detrimental. It was extremely important for us to get that done because we were going to be the sanctuary state. Every state around us had already passed legislation stopping us. While working that legislation, we came across a state law in Louisiana, and it's called the Minor Consent Law, Medical Minor Consent Law. What this law states is that your child, a minor here in the state of Louisiana, is any child under the age of 18. If your child believes that they have either an illness or a disease, that they can consent without the parent. Now at face value, that makes sense, right? If the child has a disease or an illness and the parent's not around, let's allow the child to consent to get the medical help. But that word disease, and I wish Kathy Willis was here, if any of the doctors are here, they can help confirm this for you guys. But the word illness and disease, that term in that legal format, does not mean what you think it means. Every medical code that has to be filed is under one of those two categories. I think it's three, but for sure those two. It's either an illness or a disease. Y'all know what the medical codes are, right? When you go to the doctor and you got to be diagnosed with something. So what does that mean? That means the children in the state of Louisiana do not have to get their parental consent. The physicians don't have to get the parental consent. You, your kids, your grandkids, anybody that's a parent that you know, they do not have medical consent rights for their children in this state. Unbelievable. How does this happen? Right? I've been fighting since last year to get this law changed. Fighting tooth and nail. I've talked to more legislators, I've talked to more policymakers. We got all the way to the House floor last session, and the sponsor pulled her own bill. So what is actually happening with the medical consent law, and why is it that our state don't want parents to have the rights to make medical decisions over their children? My guess has to do with that mental health intervention that's happening in education. My guess is that it has to do with that Medicaid reimbursement, because the moment that you don't give consent to that, they've got to take that kid out of that number pool, right? And if every parent knew that they could opt out of this, first of all, they have to know what's going on, and they don't. They sign those consents at the beginning of the year, right? Saying if my child falls down and needs a Band-Aid, right? It's the medical consent. Like, that's what parents think. They're like, oh, yeah, well, of course, if there needs to be a medical intervention at school, I'm going to consent to that. Surely they're going to contact me if it's an emergency. And they will. But when you sign that form at the beginning of the year, you consent to all of it. It's not specific to just the Band-Aid. This is so incredibly important to know. So, I am going to wrap it up. I am willing to take some questions too, and I hope they're actual questions. If you have any questions, what I would encourage you to do is get involved at your local school level. Find out what's happening with mental health and what that school system provides for your students. Find out what the informed consent looks like for parents. This is a big deal. Parental rights have been under attack for 50, 60 years, and parents have been lost in the dark in it because they just assume that they have those fundamental rights. And they don't. Not today. My hope for the takeaway for you guys today is this. If we're going to have to fight today for our parental rights, and we don't win this fight, what do parental rights look like for our kids? Will they have parental rights over their own kids? And what scares me, as far as this mental health intervention, you have three parts that are invested in kids, okay? And the protecting kids. You have parents, you have children, and you have the state. If the parents don't step up and assert their rights, the states are going to do it for you. So it's time for you guys to see what's going on, to understand this isn't just going to happen. This has already happened, and we need you. We need you to show up. We need to tell your friends. Have the conversation with people so we can make a movement around what parental rights look like in the state of Louisiana. All right, any questions? Anybody?
Will you try to get the bill on the floor again?
Diabolical scheme. Where's that coming from?
So, this is interesting because I was talking to Courtney Turner, if you were here earlier and got to hear her. The biggest thing that you all need to understand is that there's a long history of how we got here. A long history, very well documented history. Where did it start? I'm going to give you three things to look into. And if you got a pen and a paper, I want you to write this down. You can easily Google this. This will get you information immediately so you can have a better understanding of what's happening in education, why the CRT, why the gender ideology, why the attack on parental rights. First, I want you to write down the word equity and SEL in K through 12. The next thing I want you to write down is equity and mental health in K through 12. And the third thing that I want you to write down is critical pedagogy. That's PEDAGOGY. You can Google search those three things, and that is a great starting place to have a clear understanding of what's happening and how we got here. Paulo Freire, famously known for his educational pedagogy, which is started in the universities in the 60s in the United States. I'd say early 60s, really ramped up in the 70s, and that same ideal of critical pedagogy entered our K through 12 in about the 1980s. So it's been here a long time. These SEL, these ideals. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
I was just curious if you think maybe you can get someone to put up that bill again.
So I talked to a sponsor. The original sponsor is going to run it again. Okay. But I went to a senator and had that conversation and said, here's what's going on. Here's what happened last year. Here's what I need, because I think that the fight at the Capitol is going to be around mental health. That's where the fight's at. And it's very intimidating because what the opposition is going to say on this issue is we have vulnerable children. We have parents that either neglect or abuse their children. So how can we depend on a parental consent when it comes to those situations? My answer to that is we have state laws against the abuse of children and the neglect of children. So those laws already exist. And we cannot take the rights of parents, all parents, on the basis of just a few instances. We've got to figure out how we can make parental rights the top priority, which is the fundamental right. Does anybody here believe that they don't have the fundamental right to make the decisions for the upbringing of their children, their medical decisions, their schooling decisions? Like anybody in their right mind would fight that. But our state, and especially our federal government, but even our state, has infringed on those rights, and it's time that we take those back. Thank you, guys.
Paige, thank you so much for not only being here today, but thank you so much for standing up for moms and for children. I really appreciate you.